Hi, really happy to see everybody here. I'm Andrea Palframan. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm a settler in Canada of Irish Yorkshire ancestry, or potato people. And I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Hul'qumi'num speaking peoples on the Salish Sea. Really raising my hands and so glad to lend my voice, my privilege, and my labor to stand with everyone here, all of you carrying out beautiful acts of resistance and protection in the face of the forces that Winona revealed to us so clearly. So I live in a territory of salmon and cedar that is under threat of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. It's been my honor to work with Raven, an organization that stands with Indigenous nations who are using the courts to push back against projects that threaten their sovereignty and livelihoods and culture, and also to further advance Indigenous caretaker values and Indigenous laws so that they become the law of the land as they once were. So just really glad to welcome you all here. And if we go in a circle round, I'll just pass the mic over to Jarrett. And how about you let us know who you are in one sentence, if you can.
Hi, I'm boss Stitch, Jared, na I'm boss Dino. Suknor Tangamani Mangyap Chano, Yiskahan Shua Ahna Miso no ha chano. I'm Jared Young Man and I'm a film and director, writer, and I'm a co-founder of Nakota AV Club. And I speak Stony fluently. Sometimes when I speak English, and my pronunciation always like uh, it's wrong, but I don't mind because I don't speak English at all. So it's really crazy how I used to really people used to make fun of me that when I actually say the wrong things, and then they always say that hey, they said the wrong thing. I'm like, well, that's all you get. But anyway, I'm from Morley, Alberta, and I'm Stony Nakota. And I actually grew up in a Christian world. Yeah, and that how I actually learned how um, to be traditional when I was so young that it would actually help me who I am, who I'm from, where I came from, and then so I asked an elder that I want a name, a Stony name instead of a English name, and so that's how I got everything all together at one. That really, it really something that really spoke to me as who I am today. Now it's because that it really helped me to find my identity, and then I realized there's a lot of people in the reserves have lost identities, and then I've been trying to do helping with everyone with that, and especially youth are the ones that I really want to show them who they are. And this one of the things that Nakota AV Club, how it started, it just grew because I have no idea it's gonna grow. I just want to help the youth, and then it just turned something like this. I'm here talking to everyone, beautiful people, and I'm like blown away by it every day. Like it's been 12 years now, been in AV Club, try to show the youth how to make, I mentor the youth how to use films and make movies, scripts, animations, etc. Even though they don't want to, but their parents always let me say, hey, get them out of here. I get them out of here. I want them to do something good. All right, I'll get them out for you. And so at the end, it actually becomes something great, like change. And then their mom always like call me, thank me, and all these things that would actually help them become who they are. And then I'm so grateful to help them every day. And so yeah, that's my life. Anyway, I think I'm done.
Nice. Thank you, Jarrett. How about Sunita? Welcome.
Thank you all. My name is Sanita Fazic. I am a refugee from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Was a refugee for 5 years, became an immigrant, and now I'm a settler in Ottawa, Canada. I am a poet, I'm a novelist, I'm a playwright, and I'm also a PhD candidate at Queen's University in their Cultural Studies Department. I specialize in the intersections of social and ecological justice and how that manifests in cultural productions. Thank you.
Lovely. And Ludmila, welcome. Hi.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. I am Ludmila. I'm from Brazil, and I am a newcomer to Canada a few years from now. I am a filmmaker and a theater director. These are the two arts that I work with. I call them collective arts because I cannot do any of them by myself. And I am Sunita's collaborator. Very, very glad to be here with all of you. And I'm talking from Ottawa, the land of the Anishinaabe Nation.
Welcome. Thank you. Joy and Anne are here from, welcome.
Hi, I'm Joy Schendel-Decker. She, her, speaking to you from what's known as Santa Cruz. And I'll just do a quick land acknowledgement that the land where we are is the unceded territory of the Awaswas speaking Yupi tribe. The Yamamutsun tribal band comprised of the descendants of the indigenous people taken to mission Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. My personal background is that I'm from the East Coast. My heritage is also all or mostly settler colonial, and I've been in Santa Cruz for a little over 6 years now. And I'm a parent is where most of my time and energy goes. I'm also an artist, an activist, and a kind of amateur researcher.
And I'm Ann Altstadt. I'm also a settler here on unceded UP territory, and use they, them pronouns. I'm an artist and community activist and educator and parent and collector of things here in Santa Cruz.
Welcome. It's great to have all of you. And Laura, can you introduce yourself and then maybe go straight into your presentation?
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. I'm Laura Murray, and I am a settler. I've lived all my life almost in Anishinaabe territory of Southern Ontario. Now I live in Kingston, Ontario, Gattarakwi, and I have been working in various community projects and community arts projects for the last while. Right now I am starting out with this Bell Park project, and I'll see if I can share my screen. Can you see my screen? Yes, okay. Yeah, so this is a project that's just starting, and I'm lucky to be working with Erin Sutherland and Dorit Naaman on this project, as well as a number of community members and generous colleagues. And you may have seen Dorit's video on this site, which is called A Totem Pole on a Toxic Site. This is the pole. It's at the entrance to Bell Park. And I won't talk too much about that today, but you can watch it and bring these two presentations together. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about the space and reflect on the topics that we were assigned today. This is an 1816 map that shows Bell Island, as it's now called, an island in the middle of the Cataract River, which empties into Lake Ontario, just at the point that Lake Ontario becomes the St. Lawrence River going to the Atlantic. And Bell Island has been inhabited by various different Indigenous groups for thousands of years, and it's a sacred space for the Indigenous people of the Kingston Gattarakwi area. And between the island and the mainland was a wetland. And for thousands of years, it was a wetland. In 1950, it was turned into the city dump, however. And in the 1970s, the city dump was closed and transformed somehow or other, just by dumping some more stuff on top of it, into a golf course. And then very recently, the golf course was closed, And now Bell Park, as it is now called, is in some kind of a state of transition, possible uncertainty about what its futures will be. And it seemed to those of us who are living here, and Erin, who has lived and done really wonderful research, creation, political work in Kingston before, we wanted to meditate on this spot, both very directly on it, but also on all the connections it has to the kinds of issues that are being discussed in this fabulous conference. I regard the name Bell Park, even though it does sometimes look like this, as a rather amusing fantasy, given the history of the place, right? And also given that I interviewed the first greenskeeper of the golf course, and he told me all these stories about garbage sort of bursting up through the golf course and people's soles of their shoes being eaten away by the acid from the car batteries that were dumped there, and the carp that were splashing around in the sand traps in the spring and everything. So, you know, it's to be called Bell Park is a bit of a strange name for this place. When the water is high, this is one of the places where they have to monitor the toxins in the park that you see all around the park. When the water is high, then garbage gets swept into the forest at the island. So tampon applicators and spoons and things like this, at the same time as the mushrooms are coming up. So a couple of guys that I know go around and pick up garbage and harvest mushrooms at the same time. That's a kind of perfect symbol in some ways of this space to me. But at the same time, it is beautiful. You know, it's a place to go that is restorative and where you can see the seasons passing. I want to say a few words about the Cataract River. We're at the moment highly challenged in Kingston, Cataract, to decide what to do to deal with toxins arising not just from the landfill, but from the tannery and other industries. The possibilities seem to range from nothing to dredging. And the fantasy of dredging maybe is just like as if you could scrape everything up and take all the gunk away. But, you know, it isn't that simple. As I listen to this discussion about cleaning up the river, it seems to me that there's no undoing or wiping clean of the historical violence. The river is not a toilet or a sink. If you try too hard to scrub it clean, you would do incalculable damage to all the beings that live here now in imperfect but valiant community. So here we have these swans that are not native swans, but they live here in large numbers. We have a bridge that's being built, more pollution. We have cattails that are indigenous, and all of these things actually live here. You know, they planted trees to suck up the toxins in the park, and the beavers cut them down. Beavers live here. Beavers, you know, they don't care, they're going for it. And then just recently I was extremely moved to see spotted gar spawning right near the park. So there is all this life here at the same time. It's not possible to recreate the rivers and wetlands of Southern Ontario as they once were. Wetlands are relational mobile spaces, they're liminal spaces. They were the center of Anishinaabe life in this region and remain so. Nations meet in council at rivers and by water shorelines. People fish and harvest manoomin and bury their dead in these spaces. Anishinaabe scholar Madeline Weitung sees wetlands as emblems of legal and social understandings. They're like a political metaphor. And so destruction of wetlands was an act of both colonial and environmental violence. It was a twofer, you know. Colonial appropriation continues with the language of management, reconciliation, and remediation. But at the same time, the unfinished business of Indigenous people is to resist those things. And the waters also resist management when they overflow in different undisciplined kinds of ways. So do people resist this kind of idea of management. Last spring 2020, COVID came to Kingston like everywhere else, triggering but not causing a chain of events that also bears on the title of this panel, People as Waste. One of the first things that happened was that the homeless shelters had to close because they didn't have the capacity for physical distancing. People made various shelters for themselves around town, by City Hall, by the lake, and in Bell Park. Ultimately, it's a long story I won't get into, the city's reaction was to ask all unhoused people to go to the parking lot of Bell Park. That was far enough away from downtown not to be too disturbing and close enough to social services. La Chapelle and May talk about this encampment in terms of spatial restructuring as a mechanism of crisis abatement and neoliberal experimentation. They describe a process whereby municipal governments essentially appropriate marginal spaces into carceral forms or zones of exception. I don't disagree with this, and yet I don't think it can be said that the people who lived there for all of last summer were entirely vulnerable or surveilled. They demanded electricity and water, and eventually they got it. They developed a kind of leadership. They chose which allies to engage with. They managed resources. They advocated for themselves. Maybe we can put it in these terms. People deemed to be garbage were shunted off to a place made of garbage where they were criticized for producing too much garbage. And I want to thank the Santa Cruz folks for your site, which is so thought-provoking on these kinds of topics. And I just want to, so when in thinking about this as part of these colonial environmental processes, I want to show a picture of Nathan here and some folks. Nathan lived in the encampment, and he was informed by Laurel, the elder here, and other people that Bell Island was a sacred space with graves and a place of ceremony. And he was informed that people were really concerned that the garbage was increasing in the park and on the island. And he undertook to ride a bike with a garbage can, dragging it behind him every day out to Bell Island, and then to take the garbage can full back the next day, put it in the dumpster that they had to argue really hard to get. And this is a time when a bunch of us just sort of happened to run into each other at exactly the bridge between the island and the park and have this conversation about what this place meant to Taylor and Laurel, Indigenous colleagues here, and a volunteer was also there who was working with the encampment, and we had these conversations. So I don't want to be utopian about it, but there were things that were happening there that were a degree of conversation and collaboration and resistance, I think. In the end, really, I think it could be said that the garbage that was the problem there was actually created by the cops, because before the cops in the city came to take everything away, when they did that, they transformed homes into garbage. And this is a picture from the newspaper, and it's very direct. This was a tent, it's now garbage. And this was a shopping cart full of somebody's belongings, and now it's garbage. But it wasn't the person who had the shopping cart who made the garbage. It happens because that person was forced to leave for whatever reason. So I guess that's sort of, how I see that process happening in shorthand, and that I think that there is a lot of potential for there being ongoing discussions. The people have moved to different places, some of them under roofs and some of them in other places around the community. But it isn't exactly forgotten. So you have this discourse of management in the city sign on the left: no camping, no campfires, no dumping, no tree cutting, no motorized vehicles, dogs must be on leash, the area is monitored, right? So this is the language of control, of management. And, some of the things there, some Indigenous folks in the area would agree with, but they might express it in a more affirmative way. And then we have the mutual aid folks who put a sign just below that says, all we have is each other. So a more forward-looking kind of constructive way of thinking about futures for this space that I think we're beginning to learn from. And but we also can remember a kind of refusal, a different kind of sign that says no evictions in Bell Park. And that's a different kind of way of saying no. And so we're just beginning to explore all these kinds of dynamics. And we're really looking forward to and appreciating learning from all of you. So that's it for me. I just have to remember how to stop this share. Where's my...
Thanks so much, Laura. So many intersections in one tiny space. The beaver architects at work all the while. I would really like to pass it over to Jarrett Youngman, and he can do whatever he wants for 10 whole minutes. He can play guitar or regale us with stories. We're really excited. Thanks.
Yes, and I think my presentation would be like the AV Club, how how everything's just, I don't have anything to share on or anything about. I'm just gonna like talk about this thing that we always have trouble with, like non-native people, with non-native people, that when we're filming and other films, because what I realized about filming, that we actually seen, how can I start with something that I created when I was young. I actually admire people on film, like let's say Spider-Man, or let's say Brad Pitt, who actually starred in a Troy and all that things that actually did what they done, even Gladiator. The character that I actually rather want to be white, that I want to be that person. I want, even romance video that I saw, I want to be that person. I want to be that a romantic guy, that what he did, what he actually had a romance with this woman. That was the thing that I grew up and everybody has in Morley. And one day when we're actually learning filming, I realized that there's not a lot of native history that were in the films, or there are things that are in the films, native people, but they actually did not resemble, I mean, did not capture uh, the native picture. I'm like, that's not how we are. Like, that's not how. So the done native films, they actually make the native film, and then it doesn't have the clear picture. And that's the whole problem, that we're like, you know what? It's something that we don't necessarily look at. Like, that's not the way we actually do it. Like, that's not the way everything's just like, it doesn't add up with us at all. And so this is when we're start to learning how to do AV club, and then one of the kids decided to make a movie about res dogs, how they actually got their res dogs kidnapped and by non-native people, city people, and uh, animal rescuers, without any without any question of anything. They just take the dog away from them, and then they're they'll be calling everyone like, hey, do you see my dog? Like, do you see my dog? That's the problem that happened in Morley, that we realized. I never actually thought of this. The people who live close to the highway actually getting the dogs taken every day, like every day. Even a couple of days ago, this guy was um he talked about that. Oh, this person just came out my turn off and then tried to take my dog. Like, that's like 3 times. And even though I tell them to buzz off, like, these even though there's a trespass sign, they see it, but they don't care. They just want to, they think they're actually rescuing a dog. They're roaming dogs. So in the reserve, it's different because we actually let everyone free, like freely. Even our dogs, we let them freely all over the place. That's the problem that the non-native does not understand, the city people does not understand, because they lease their dog. And so these kids actually want to make a res dogs, about how a situation always get caught up with that. And so we got some grants for to do that film, and then I never done any. That's my first documentary film we ever done, and that really grew something that tells a story that these kids are actually telling, that is true, that really makes sense to me, that we are capturing something that happens in Morley or every reserve, and that tells a story that what we're going through. And so a lot of people still disagree that they're actually doing a wrong thing, like the garbage. They didn't think it's wrong at all to actually throw in the reserve. They don't actually educate themselves. And so that's when we're making films about educating people, the non-native people, and educating how we actually are people, that we do care about pets, dogs, lands, even though that it doesn't really add up with everyone like that, but we do actually try to show them that we love films that had to explain to them. That's the whole picture that we did when we actually get involved with something in morally, because we're still learning a whole bunch of things about buffaloes too. And then that's one of the things that the buffaloes actually what we learn about how we discovered that many buffalo were taken away because the non-native want us to starve, and because they don't want us to eat anymore. They want us to starve to death, and so they actually kill the entire buffalo and to make us suffer. And I never knew that before, and even the kids did not realize that before. Then it came to something that really questioned us. I guess they really want us dead. Like, holy crap, but we survived and we actually came through it, and we actually I still have my language, and I still actually talk about stories and all these things that elders tell us about, and then we still remember them in a way. It's incredible how the couple months ago, when I do my research, I'm getting better now, and then I realized that RCMP was made to get rid of natives. And that really blew my mind that it didn't really actually make sense anymore. That how are we gonna cope something like this, that they think they're being helpful? And so the more we learn, the more educate ourselves with this system that's happening every day. It's not really something they don't want us to know. And so I'm picking all of those um, ideas and then put them in the film. And then that's mean because of the kids, what they did with the res dogs, actually learning more about how the system works now. I didn't realize there's a racism going on because I didn't really actually known. And then now the more that we got into films, the non-native asked us for grants to actually help them out, and then we actually got used by them. And then now we actually try to get our ideas to have the non-native telling the story of our story. And then we tell them not to do that because we actually are the right people to tell the story, not you. And then so they got angry, and then they don't want involved with us anymore because they just want to do their own thing. They want that power. They want that satisfaction of their life because they have a meaningless storytelling. And for a long time, it made me realize about how Native people actually respected the religious of non-Native people. And then they actually never actually respected our cultural. We've been respecting the whole the universe of their world, but they never actually respected our cultural and traditionals. And so that's why we came in and started making a whole bunch of films about this is what's happening, and this is what happened last long time for the last thousands of years. And I was talking to a few people of another other Sixica collective, Nappy Collective. They have their own club, and they actually talk about the same things. They actually say the same thing about how they became the filmmakers because the non-native actually made the whole footage wrong. And so my attitude would be it's better if a non-native direct that story instead of a non-native, because the native will actually tell the right way, and then they actually fix it, and then they actually do it the right things. But if a non-native do it, they got everything all wrong. Like that one part from uh star from Leonardo DiCaprio resonate or something. Like I watched it once, and then they made all the native all dirty, all of them like a dirty Indians, and I'm like, we're not dirty. Why would the director think that we're such a dirty people, and then the non-native are like clean? And so back to that they actually did not actually capture who we are. That really upset me, that every time when I see something. And so as a little boy, that I was brainwashed to become a non-native person, and then now I see what they actually try to do to actually erase us who we are, and even a residential school to erase who we are, and even the things that's happening every day to erase us who we are. And now we're not gonna take it, and so we're just gonna be like doing what we're doing. Who we are is being indigenous person, that we're gonna be helping out a lot of people, even the kids. I start from the kids, and then they grow up to be who they gonna become when they grow up. That's how I actually mentor them how to make films, capture this the right way, and then ask an elder to actually, is this the right thing to do? Is this okay to do? So go for the elder to ask that question, not to a person. A lot of people always come to us like non-native people and then say that, okay, I'm gonna mentor you. I'm gonna help this native who actually doesn't know anything about these things. And then I'm gonna be just coming in, and then, you know what? I'm help this native. He's a poor guy, and we're just like, we know what we're doing, man. We know what we're doing. And then you can't just tell us that we're not actually capable of doing all these things that you think you're helping us, but we know what we're doing. We actually have our own way of making films, our own way. And it's really great to actually experience that with the youth, because it's wonderful to be part of this every day. And the AV Club actually growing so big, and I never thought that would actually happen. And I'm really grateful to actually be part of this. And it's still happening today, that what's going on. And it's like these non-native telling us that you actually doing something wrong, and then we gotta make it right. That's what they telling us every day, and then still are. And it's still like something that it doesn't really add up with us. Like, we're the dumb people and they're the smart ones, and we still like, you know what, look at the world right now. And an elder told me once that a couple months ago, he was like, you know what, the reason why the COVID is happening is because the world been so much abuse. And then when the world shut down, look at all the animals coming up, and that's when the world is trying to heal itself again. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say now. Thank you all.
All right. Wow. That's great. Thank you. I'm going to pass it right over to, okay, Joy Schendeldecker and Ann Allstat. Take it away.
Hi. Of course, right before you called on us, we accidentally reloaded our project page. So apologies. We're going to share our screen in just a moment.
Do you want to re-navigate from people's ways? Oh, there it is.
Okay, and while they're doing that, if folks have questions for Jarrett, or Jarrett, if you have links to some of your projects, please take the moments in the chat and just communicate, connect with each other.
Jeez.
If you haven't had a chance to look at the amazing exhibits as part of this conference, please take the time during the breaks to go check them out. They're just epic projects. This art is a kind of anti-garbage. It's beautiful.
Okay, we've got our screen sharing up, and everybody can see us. Okay. So we're basically just we're going to introduce the project and then just talk very briefly about some of the sections. So
And just for clarity, Joy and I are two collaborators on a project with many other people, some of whom are also going to be able to join on one of the panels tomorrow.
Yeah.
As an affluent, majority liberal coastal town in California, Santa Cruz has a chronic problem with waste mismanagement at the nexus of extreme gentrification, racialized geographies of houselessness, and city property regimes. That nexus produces the terms of environmental racism representative of many US cities, yet is extreme in Santa Cruz. According to recent research, Santa Cruz is the country's least affordable metro area for renters, measurable by the extreme disparity between average rents and income. Houselessness is also racialized within Santa Cruz's unhoused community, possessing the highest rate of homeless African Americans in the country, at 700 per 10,000 in the general population. This places liberal homeowner interests, generally amplified by city policy that supports real estate development, and the city's houseless community at odds. One area where that conflict manifests itself is in relation to waste, according to which houselessness is seen as a site of uncontrollable trash, and its human representatives equated with waste. It's an ideological maneuver familiar in longstanding African American environmental justice critiques.
In response to this situation, we proposed a critical and interactive cartographic project to visualize these axes, connecting the dots between structural forces and thereby enabling activist transformation. This comprises a digital collage of land ownership plots, government department responsibility, unhoused neighborhoods, and varieties of environmental waste, including highway automobile pollution, light industry smog, and particulate matter, consumer discards, and wildfire atmospheric toxicity. Our research demonstrates uneven exposure that places disenfranchised bodies at risk, carried out through the city's dysfunctional waste management practices. Ultimately, our creative and transdisciplinary project examines how current waste mismanagement perpetuates long-standing colonial legacies built on white supremacy, wherein the convergence of private property, bureaucratic lock-in, legal structures, and policing risk a variety of eco-fascism that collapses waste and toxicity with racialized bodies. It will thereby intervene in local environmental racism that's very much a matter of garbage.
Our research shows how California state law, including Prop 13 and Prop 218 and many other landmark legal rulings, ties municipal services to property ownership and taxes, meaning that disenfranchised, unhoused folks are victimized through chronic institutional neglect and the city's denial of services. In 2019, there were 865 unsheltered city residents counted. The majority of these residents live in unsanctioned camps along the San Lorenzo River, in city and county parks and parking lots, and along several sections of Highway 1, property variously owned by the city, county, and California Department of Transportation. The result effectively produces a collapsing of houselessness, race, and waste in city policy, driven in part by reactionary public outrage regularly expressed on social media platforms, demanding police and even vigilante response. Instead of providing essential infrastructure, such as portable toilets, hand washing stations, and garbage bins, all even more necessary at the time of COVID-19 pandemic that disproportionately affects the unhoused, the city generates a vicious cycle productive of yet more waste. The police regularly sweep homeless camps, dole out fees and fines, arresting those who resist, and often channeling their confiscated possessions directly to the city's landfill.
Opposed to this false solution, our mapping project reveals how the city's response represents the culmination of deep histories of colonial dispossession, even as it connects to the current policies of environmental racism. Indeed, Santa Cruz's history is intimately entangled with the Spanish missions and its transformation of indigenous lands into forced labor plantations and cultural genocide. The perverse result being that many surviving Native Californians, including members of the Amamutsan tribal band, cannot afford to live in their traditional territories and are in fact overrepresented in the unhoused community. As a political organization in alliance with a variety of local community groups and individual actors, we'll use our map to push for a system-wide, consistent city policy that elevates socio-environmental justice as the guiding principle of waste management and housing justice in our effort at deprivatization and recommoning. We will also use these maps to strategize with unhoused community members in formulating a more equitable and ecological approach to the noxious conditions that currently perpetuate debility through uneven exposure to toxicity waste and pestilence, which we also hope will resonate in cities beyond our local context. That's a mouthful. So we won't read anything else out loud, but we just wanted to sort of give you a little overview of some of the sections that we created. So we've got a section on why we focused on this particular intersection. We also have these categories here. You can click on different categories. You can either scroll through and then there's information within sections to get sort of historical overviews, or you can jump to a particular topic where we have interviews. We have 4 interviews up, and we have more that will go up as they're processed. And you can go through some slideshows with documentary imagery. Some of them have some explainer text with them. We also have some historical context and these amazing maps that one of our comrades, Connor, made these 2 maps that I would encourage everybody to take a look at more closely, that this one and this one that link together sensitive habitats in the wildland urban interface with property ownership, really. And I think this map is particularly great because it compares. I'll just read this little caption here. Santa Cruz City has zoned 23,501.5 acres of the wildland urban interface as residential. That's 2,869 individual parcels in which the city allows the construction of housing. Yet the city council recently, well, they have for a long time, banned the unhoused from sheltering almost everywhere in the city, hypocritically citing fire danger in the WUI as one of the reasons. So Santa Cruz has gotten a lot more nervous about a wildfire in our backyard since last year's CZU lightning complex fire, which caused the evacuation of basically everything that you see in orange and red there, plus some. It came surprisingly close to city limits, which had not happened before. But the point is that people who are living unsheltered, the question continually is, where will they go? We just see that, you know, repeatedly. Where will they go? It becomes a rhetorical question, but for us, it's really a very concrete question. You know, when you're providing, or not providing, when you're doing mutual aid with people who are living outside, you know, you become so much more intimately connected to these problems. They're no longer intellectual problems. And, you know, just try to personally relocate somebody to a place that will be safe for them. It's really challenging, and it doesn't feel good to drop somebody off with their possessions when you know that they're likely going to be swept again from that location very soon, generally for environmental excuses. Mm-hmm. So I will stop screen sharing. There's so much to look at here. I am also, thank you. Okay.
All right, thank you. What a brilliant tool, and what a great way to draw people into the storytelling. Thank you so much for sharing.
Also, just to reiterate, it is still a work in progress. So even as we're speaking, we have things in the files waiting to be added to certain sections. So
Check back in with the project as more content is included.
Yeah, and we plan to keep it going. So hopefully it can be an ongoing resource for our community and beyond.
Fantastic. Phil, thank you for a little window into that mapping world. Thanks.
Thank you.
Really honored to introduce Sunita Faizik and Ludmila Mar-dos-Reis to share their project with us.
Thanks so much. I'm gonna start with the screen share, then I'm gonna pass it on to my collaborator, Ludmila. Just one second. Let me know, someone just tell me if you can see this. Yes, you can see the screen share? All right, so we're gonna take a different, well, everyone has their own unique angle, but our angle for People in Waste will be to really zoom into war survivors, refugees, and immigrants. And the presentation is not an intellectual act for me. It's situated in my life story. I'm from Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I put a little map here because I noticed a lot of people don't know where that country is. It's in Eastern Europe. It used to be one big country called Yugoslavia. This was a communist country. And when its benevolent dictator Tito died, a whole bunch of sections started to claim independence, which triggered war. Bosnia and Herzegovina is the green one in the middle, and it's rather unique because the majority of its population are Muslims. So these are my people, they're called Bosniaks. And the obvious impact on war, one of the obvious impact is the death toll of human bodies. In Bosnia, 100,000 people were killed, 80% of them were Bosniaks. And the war lasted between 92 and 95 because it wasn't obvious to the West that this was a genocide. It kept continually hearing the words civil unrest or civil war. But when the Srebrenica massacre happened, where 8,372 Bosniak boys and men were murdered, a hole was made in the ground, their bodies were dumped as you would dump waste into a landfill, it became evident that this was actually a genocide. And of the 4 million Bosnians, 2.2 were displaced all over the world. This includes my family. And the biggest actually place with Bosnians is the United States of America, where there's about 500,000 Bosnians there. But a little bit less known is the environmental impact of wars. So, one of the most dramatic ways humans can affect societies and ecosystems is through the performance of military activities. And warfare-induced disturbances to soil, air, water, and ecosystems are of 3 types. We've got physical, chemical, biological. Obviously, they're meant to disturb the quote-unquote enemy, but they often result in thoughtless and undesired ramifications for entire ecosystems. It's really important for me to stress the impact of war after the war, because war keeps affecting people and ecosystems, particularly through landmines. And here you can see Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia as well. All those red dots are landmines that still exist today that are killing people and other than humans. After the war, there's a tremendous amount of pollution and deforestation, particularly in countries that are economically crippled. You have to heat your house, you have to rebuild houses. People go and they fell trees in order to do that. But of course, when a country is crippled by war, the environmental governance systems are also unable to function for a long time. The war in Bosnia ended over 20 years ago, and still this has not been rebuilt. And then, as you can imagine, Sarajevo, which is the capital of Bosnia, where I'm from, was completely destroyed. And there's a huge environmental cost to rebuilding. All that concrete, that electricity, all those materials required to rebuild broken cities have a huge cost. But war is garbage. But it's not just war is garbage during war and after war, but it's also before and between endless states of war. And here you have a photograph of a little bit closer to home, I suppose, from Alberta in Canada, where they're essentially just bombing the landscape in order to test their military infrastructures. And that's actually how we know the ecological impact of war. They're not measuring it in zones of conflict. It's too dangerous. They're measuring it while they're playing with their military stuff. And so, before I pass it on to Ludmila, this photo for me really exemplifies how much garbage comes out of war, because you see the military industrial complex, which essentially is just Eisenhower's way of finding a discursive way to embody the link between constant states of war and the necessity to keep having war so that GDP and gross domestic products and economic wealth can continue to grow. Canada is deeply embedded in the military industrial complex, but I suppose no one is as embedded as the United States. Here you see Afghanistan war, Vietnam war, Iraq war, all that trash, and it's to die for war on Iran or any other wars that they're engaged in. In fact, a lot of profit was made during the war in Bosnia. A little bit closer to the theme at hand, there are long-term consequences of war, and those are, the cheap labor that's produced, all those bodies of waste. So transnational labor networks benefit intensely from forced exile. Refugee bodies are cheap labor, but also importantly, the bodies of war victims, those who have survived the war and are left behind, these are incredibly cheap labor. Here we have a photograph of women working in a textile manufacturing company in Bosnia. And there's a little bit of a legal loophole for Hugo Boss, Burberry, Zara, all of these companies that are able to put made in EU tags, but they're paying these women local Bosnian rates. So I did a bit of math, and so a Bosnian woman in these factories would make 170 euros per month. That's 235 Canadian dollars, compared to 2,500 euros if this factory were in France, England, or Germany. The difference is really staggering because the numbers speak for themselves. So a Bosnian woman worker gets 6.8% of a Western factory worker. That means that there's a 93.2%, 93.2 gap between the wages. And it just shows how war survivors, in particular women, become very vulnerable to exploitation. And I'm going to pass it on to my collaborator, Ludmila. Just stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Sanita. Yes, so I'm Ludmila, and I collaborated with Sanita in the cine poems that you have for Land Matters. You can see one on the website, and we're actually going to be premiering another one with you at the end of this talk. My contribution to the panel will focus on the moment that I realized myself, just like Sanita, on my own story, on new area on how immigrant bodies can be disposable. I am a newcomer. My residency got approved to Canada about 6 months ago. But I have lived and worked here since 2016, and I haven't traveled anywhere. The process that I went through to get my residency is one attached to my master's. It's called the Provincial Nominee Program. And it is a process that takes about 24 months from start to finish. I get all my paperwork, I get all of my documents, I send it to the Processing Center for Immigration, and I don't hear anything for about 20 months. At that time, that's when I get a request for something called a health check, which is the moment that I got this awakening on myself. The health check is fundamental on this process because if you, as an economic migrant, can cause any long-term costs to the Canadian health care system, you're not going to be approved. I moved here with my partner who takes ADHD medication, prescribed medication for about 20 years. And at the time of when we did our exams, which was on the second semester of 2020, we had our urine, our blood, and x-rays, and we saw a certified doctor. My partner was taking additional medications. They were also taking medication to sleep and to deal with anxiety. So when we got to the point to talk to the doctor, we were worried, and we asked them, what do you think about this? We pay for all the medications. There's no extra cost. There's anything like that. What I heard from the doctor was, I wouldn't worry much. They, and they mean the immigration department, the immigration center, they know that your stream have people after the first year starting to take medication to sleep and or to wake up. So I wouldn't worry about your case specifically. So when that moment, to me, it opened a whole new understanding of my own labor in this country. I understood that the system knows that a healthy immigrant body can start to decay because of the immigration process itself, and nothing has really been done about it today. And this not only does in fact overwhelm the health system to a certain degree, but it also perpetuates the need for more and more immigrant bodies to keep coming to fulfill the needs of their labor. Because our lasting life is reduced in the long and the short term if you take a lot of prescription drugs, you understand that there are direct consequences very quickly, such weight gain and things like that. So without further ado, I do want to share with you the second cine poem that we created that talks a lot about both what Sunita experienced and said in her talk and what I just did. So if I can figure out Zoom very quickly, we'll get there. Let me know if you can hear it, okay?
Unsettled, troubled, strapped, startled, a little drunk. My mother and father inhale in Bosnian and exhale like people used to final breaths. If our passports, visas, Game Boys, Canadian dollars should plunge with the rest of the plane, at least our dreams soared sky high, aerial, above the Atlantic and its white knuckles. At least, if we plummet and crash, we are guaranteed a fast, torture-free final destination. I am old at 7, ancient at 13, surrendered the country of childhood early, my youth stolen by each border crossed clandestinely. Our first legal entry as immigrants aged me by several years, if not decades. The children of refugees and immigrants lose a year for each time a parent's back breaks. A year per rotten tooth, another for spirits drained down the kitchen sink, and another for stunted dreams, strained hopes for a better future that never arrives, hanging on the wall like unrecognized university degrees. Immigrant parents are welcomed into factory lines, flushed when jobs are exported to China. They are invited to stand all day long as minimum wage cashiers and janitors, work night shifts as security guards or on-call superintendents. Bienvenue into retirement homes to wipe, clean, and scrub the bodies of neglected elders like they scrub fancy hotel rooms. Our parents, who must enact immigrant gratitude for the yearly 25 cents pay increase. My parents have little left to give except their expectations. I am their hope. This poem bears the burden of their immigrant hopes.
Thank you so much.
When artists draw their swords, the world is sliced open. Thank you so much. So profound. All of you, the work that you're doing, moving from commodification to common ground, from disposability to sacredness, from garbage to beauty and wholeness. It's such a joy to bring together all of these amazing practitioners, scholars, warriors who are cleaning up the mess of environmental racism and restoring relationships with the world and with each other. So may these relationships continue, and may the maps that we create and live and walk flourish. See you at the next panel, folks. Thank you so much, Mickey. And over to you if you have any housekeeping words for us.
Hi, I really would love to also echo what you said, Andrea. This was an amazing, amazing panel. If people would like to stay for another, if anybody has any questions, there's nothing really coming in the chat. I think we're all just awestruck at the moment, trying to absorb all the very profound offerings, and really, really thank you. And many of these, I think all of us here all have exhibits in the, if you want to look at more work, please check out the exhibits and leave comments in the, at the bottom of the exhibits. There's a place where you can leave a comment, and it's certainly welcome. So there's a lot here. If anybody has a question, I'm looking in the chat. I think we're just going to leave it at that then, so we can stay on schedule. Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.